Hello, everyone. Hello, I'm Paul. I'm Education Lead for the Ministry of Eco Education. Welcome to this panel discussion, part of our summer of exploring big questions. It's actually the fifth in our series. We're the charity supporting teachers to weave sustainability through their teaching. And at the Ministry of Eco Education, we bring together the resources and opportunities from hundreds of different organisations into learning journeys framed by big questions. Things like, does anything ever go away? Or where should we get our food? Or how should we heat our homes? Or even questions like, do people in other countries matter? So today we're going to be exploring this big question. And we're joined by a wonderful panel of David, Caroline, and Anthony. And we're going to start in a moment with each of the panelists sharing their response to the question, and then we're going to open up the discussion with some questions from the audience and also maybe some discussion between panelists. So please, throughout the event, please feel free to add your thoughts into the chat. So just to give a setting and an introduction, the Department for Education published an update in 2023 of their sustainability and climate change strategy, which sets out the expectation for schools in England, and it has four strategic aims. And they are things like excellence in education and skills for a changing world, preparing all young people for a world impacted by climate change through learning and practical experience. It also explores things like net zero, also resilience to climate change, and then also there's an aim of a better environment for future generations, enhancing biodiversity, improving air quality, increasing access to and connection with nature in and around education and care settings. I'm going to go into even more detail, so hopefully we won't lose anyone. We've got to achieve that, the DFE says success depends on stakeholders from across the sector working together with evidence at the heart of activity. And to achieve that, there are five action areas. We've got climate education, green skills and careers, education, estate and digital infrastructure, operations and supply chains, and then a fifth one of international. And there are government funded initiatives achieving all of these or working towards achieving these. And we've got things like the National Education Nature Park and we've got climate ambassadors. And both of those have a keen focus on climate action plans. But there are also hundreds of organisations working outside of those initiatives, including people like the Ministry of Eco Education. But we've also got really long, well-established organisations like Eco Schools or Forest Schools or the Wildlife Trusts, or even, we've got subject organisations again who are collectively working towards the same. So to just talk a bit more about climate action plans. They've got pillars themselves of things like decarbonisation, climate education and skills, adaptation and resilience, and biodiversity. And a key part of this is also an expectation to have sustainability leads, and some of that we might explore that kind of the language of is it expected, is it mandatory, and where are we sitting with that? But what about then the role of geography teachers? So climate change has been a formal part of the geography curriculum in the UK for maybe 2 decades. It was officially introduced to Key Stage 3 in 2008, and it later expanded into GCSE and A-level specifications. And it was in 2013 that the Department for Education updated the national curriculum to explicitly require students to understand how human and physical processes interact to change the climate. And then more recently, in 2016, the GCSE and A-level geography specifications began featuring expanded modules focusing on the causes, consequences, and response to extreme weather events and climate change. Now, most recently, we've had the curriculum and assessment review, which identified four subjects which will link to climate change, and they are science, geography, DT, and citizenship. And for geography, the curriculum and assessment review said climate change and sustainability must be consistently and explicitly present across all key stages, from physical geography through to applications and human geography, with greater curriculum detail and coherence. And Steve Brace and the Geographical Association have been commissioned to redraft that national curriculum. So we all know geography teachers are vocal champions for climate and nature, and we're joined by many of those people on this call. And actually, so geography teachers are so much champions that many have actually left the classroom to pursue this, and I guess I'm maybe testament to that. Many of us have also written books about it, and we all speak regularly championing geography and geography's role within this. And I have to be honest and say that actually geography ultimately is the glue to the Ministry of Eco Education's approach. And I think if any geographer looked at what we've created, you'd think it was very much geography. So, what is it that's special about geography and geography teachers in particular? And what advice can we give geography teachers? And how could they, or geography teachers in particular, support their schools on their sustainability journey? So, to answer that and explore these sorts of questions, I'd first like to welcome Dr. David Preece. And David is head of geography at Teach First, and he leads the curriculum design, teacher development, and initial teacher education for geography across England. And so, David, I learned something new when I was researching. You've got a PhD in climate change from UCL. Is that true?
It is, yeah, many years ago. That's what I did. That's what I did my doctorate in.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'll hand over to you, David, if you wanted to.
Thanks very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here. I love geography. I love geography teaching. I've been doing this for nearly 25 years now, and I think it's probably the longest identity I've ever had in my life. I've been involved in the GA for a couple of decades. I've been involved in the Royal Geographical Society. I've been a trustee. I've been a chartered geographer, and this is who I am. This is my individuality. But I'm not necessarily sure that we're the solution to everyone's ills. We do like a geography joke and a stereotype in schools, don't we? We that there aren't so many some of the subjects that get the same. The gap year, the tweed jackets, the colouring pencils, the leading on D of E, or the assumption that we'll be doing trips at the end of a school term when other subjects are going home. And I think often these days, eco and sustainability leadership gets lumped in with that. We get assumed that the geography department will take the lead or wants to take the lead, perhaps contrary to the DFE guidance that Paul was talking about. Let's be clear, often that's a good thing. It is valued, it's valued aligned, that there are a number of brilliant geography teachers who provide incredible sustainability leadership and take real professional pride and joy in doing so. It works for them and who they are as individuals. At Teach First, we run a 2 year training program, and in the second year, our trainees take on projects and do some work with their communities. And I've got a number of my second years who are working on environmental leadership, sustainability, and those things because it's what they went into the classroom for. But I don't think we can assume that's true of everyone, and I don't think we can be ignorant of the risks involved. Although GCSE and A level entries are climbing or steady in the last 5 to 10 years, numbers of teachers entering geography as a profession is not, and it is an increasing challenge. We have increasing challenges of non-specialist teachers, people teaching in schools who aren't necessarily geography QTS holders or perhaps don't hold a geography in their first degree. And we are seeing increasingly with the rise of a number of spaces, common themes and curriculum designs. And we need to recognise and embrace the diversity of geography as a disciplinary identity. There's a lot to geography. You might come in as a massively economics focused person. You might come in as a glaciologist. And there's a lot that makes up geography. And there's a lot of intersectionality to human beings too. We don't assume that people who are facing a particular issue automatically ought to be the ones that lead on it. So why might we make that assumption in terms of eco anxiety or in schools? And if we talk about the strands of the climate action plans that Paul mentioned earlier, decarbonising the estate is for the estates team, and perhaps sits with their best practice. Biodiversity could just as much be for biology and science as it is for geographers. Climate education, of course, works with us, yes, but perhaps the careers lead would have something to say about green skills. And I think the adaptation and resilience needs a different component. So I think what I'm suggesting is that we want to build a team to do this. We want to make sure that we are building the best squad able to tackle sustainability in our schools. We want, of course, senior leadership involved. We want the estates and the operations teams involved. We should have governance involved and governance oversight, a sustainability governor as well as an estates governor, perhaps. And we should make the most of the community that we're working within, especially if you've got volunteer experience or fundraisers. And the teachers and students themselves need to be doing that. And ultimately, I think Sustainability needs to be sustainable work. We can't put it onto one person. We cannot make one person responsible for fixing it in a school. We have to mitigate the risks to those people. So I think geography teachers should be part of a team for sure. It's part of what we do in geography. It's part of the rich tapestry of what geography teachers do well, but it's not our sole purpose. We want to be able to think about how organisations like the Ministry of Eco Education provide cross subject phase and training, bringing in voices from primary, from secondary, and putting them together, bringing in science and biology and citizenship and DT and putting them together, not just making it a sole thing and using the resources that exist around us. Things like the Climate Ambassador program that Paul spoke of. I've been a climate ambassador for a few years, and it's one of the great joys to go into schools and help out. Things like the Royal Meteorological Society and their curriculum for climate, or the Eco Schools program that Paul talked about, and bringing those places to generate student leadership and ownership in that space. We need healthy and supported teams. We don't need superheroes. Should geography be in the lineup? For sure. Should we insist and expect that all geography teachers want to play the sustainability game? I don't think we should. Will they always be our MVPs? Maybe, but I don't think we should expect that. And so I think a qualified yes is the answer to the question. Are geography teachers the key? They're not. Building the right team is the key. Can geographers play an important part in that team? I think absolutely they can.
Thank you, David. That's kind of a really thoughtful response there. I think it's interesting that you started there with the sort of stereotypes element there, which I always wonder how these stereotypes still exist because when you go into schools, we don't necessarily see that manifested. Um, yeah, and putting it in that context of the wider risks is also, I think, really important. That sense of actually what's going on within the profession and kind of there's the potential to add too much pressure to an already burdened group. And I think the other key thing that stood out for me there was that sense of a team. And what I quite enjoy is that we've moved beyond these sort of simplistic ideas of saying actually, in order to achieve this broader kind of spectrum of goals and aims and all these, like you say, the decarbonisation of the estate, there's specialists within those spaces who would be much better placed than a kind of a geography teacher. So yeah, thank you for that so much, David. I'm gonna hand over now to Anthony. Now, Anthony is principal lecturer and subject leader for geography education at the University of Roehampton. And you're also, Anthony, you've been a long-standing member of the Early Years and Primary Committee of the Geographical Association. Anthony.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Paul, and thank you, David. It's really, really interesting. We're going to be saying some similar things. So the question is, are geography teachers the key to whole school sustainability? My answer is no. I'm going to say a definite no. So I think it would be very unfair to load that onto an early years or primary lead in geography or to a primary teacher. And I think sometimes those assumptions, as David suggested, can be made of the teacher of geography, and that can be part of the problem. So that siloing of these areas in one subject can be still problematic in some schools. And I felt that when I was full-time teaching in primary myself, and there was definitely no sense necessarily at that time that D&T, for example, as a subject or citizenship might play a part. And I don't think science either, maybe 10 years or so ago. So I think there's a real positive there that maybe 4 subjects, as Paul said, are being cited here alongside subject leads and alongside enthusiasts and eco committees and so on. But it's too much to bear as a burden, I would say, for just the geography lead or the teacher of geography in primary, particularly because they're non-specialists, because they may have an interest and enthusiasm, but they don't have that specialist insight necessarily. So for me, whole school sustainability is much more about subject leadership plus SLT leadership and that wider governance leadership as well, intersecting with trusts and local authorities and government as well. That leadership has to come both from the bottom and also from the top as well, because it is about those operational decisions that genuinely teachers don't really have much say in. They're about those financial choices, about bins and about food procurement and things like that, which are often sometimes completely outside the school's hands as well. So it's for us to agitate and argue sometimes those things to the people who do make those decisions. And those decisions are definitely not at the door of a geography teacher either. But I think where geography can play a part alongside other subjects is how that's framed for learners, because geography, if you're not that aware, is about those relationships between us and locations and places and the different environments that we find ourselves in. So there's a real win with geography in primary because it is about what you see outside your window, what's on your school site, and what's near to you. So it's about those challenges and opportunities in those particular spaces. In particular, we need to teach them about the destruction, but also about the opportunities and the optimism there as well. And as Paul said as well, the curriculum assessment review is placing a greater emphasis on sustainability, climate education, and those interactions that geography in particular focuses on. So I do think we will be central, but we're perhaps not the key to unlocking climate education and the sustainability problems that these sites have. Schools are £1 million businesses, £1 million plus businesses if it's a big school. So those businesses need to be carefully worked with to make sure that they make as little impact as possible. And sometimes those impacts are not really thought through in my experience. So effective sustainability education, in my mind, happens where learning and the actions of the school and the values of the school actually do mean something. We've all sat in those meetings where we've created mission statements and value statements, but how many of those really consider the impacts and the actions that we're taking on a daily basis in terms of water and food and travel and things like that? So geography interacts with things like the Sustainable Development Goals. You may have in your mind when I talk about the intersecting circles of the SDG goals, where at the bottom you've got the biosphere, you've got the place that we live and survive because of, and that's so important for us to consider first before we consider the society and the societal impacts that we have, and then the economy may come last. And of course, if we think about politicians and we think about the decision makers, it's often that top one that comes first. We perhaps don't think so much about society and certainly don't think so much about the decisions that we're making about the biosphere. So it's that we need to interact with when we're teaching our geography. We need to think about that quite carefully, how we put that across to them because of these difficulties that are being created. So I remember a time in 2010 when I was teaching full time and we had this Sustainable Schools project, this agenda for all schools to be sustainable by 2020. And I looked up what that looked like because I was very hopeful and optimistic at that time what we might be doing as a school sector to lead the way, to almost have these little green beacons in different areas, these community spaces which could show the rest of the estate, whether that's the NHS or whether that's private spaces as well, how we might operate. And it was about food sourcing, very rooted things. It was about energy efficiency. It was about water conservation, about biodiversity on school grounds, and as is important, as Paul said, in some of the newer things that are coming out now, which are kind of recreating some of the things that perhaps were burst in 2010, the idea of community engagement as well. So sustainability was seen as a vision of the future that we perhaps rode back on a little bit, and maybe we're getting back to that space, maybe again. But there's lots of hope for optimism, and as has been mentioned already, we've got climate action plans, we've got climate ambassadors, National Education Nature Park, sustainability support for education, and what was most important to me as a teacher way back when was the Eco Schools project. That really helped me tap into people and go to conferences and connect with people who spoke my language as a subject lead, so I could go back and translate that into something that was something that we could work towards together. And it's that working towards together that David mentioned that I think is so important. It's those allies that you need to have as a subject lead or as a geography teacher or as just somebody who's teaching anything really, to try and push the agenda forward. So it's about interacting with the SLT and maybe the school business managers. It's about influencing procurement and energy use and waste management, but it's also about the waste, the end of the day, the end of life, the end of use, people, the caretakers in the school. Where does that rubbish go to? How are we caring for the outdoor learning spaces? But it's also the school governors, David's examples are really good in terms of who we should perhaps nominate. You have maybe a sustainability governor alongside a school site governor as well. But it is important to engage the parents, the grandparents, the community groups as well. It's curriculum plus. It's curriculum plus the community. I think that geography and other subjects should play a really important part in. And I really want to impress on you the importance of those single case studies that can really resonate with schools to try and answer this question of can geography, can other subjects play a part in really showing the way? And you may have seen The Guardian recently, St John's School in Barnet has been featured. They had a very flooded playground through some of the year, particularly with the more unpredictable and the more deluge-ridden skies that we're getting from time to time. They had a very impermeable tarmac playground, and then rather than just digging lots of new drainage solutions at probably much greater cost, they just redesigned the site. They had rain gardens, they had planted areas, and they had really impressive results. They had reduced flooding, biodiversity increased. They had a more usable and attractive space. So it's those case studies that we maybe need to go to these people who hold the power in schools, and we need to try and get them to engage with us on those sorts of project. So really, that's my story. Geography should and could play a part. It shouldn't be the siloed space where these ideas are discussed. It should be a really whole school effort, but it's really to be asking central questions that geography is really well placed to ask. How does this place work? How could it work better? Why does it work like this? What has been thought about to make these old buildings, these old tarmac playgrounds better? Because we perhaps did think that that was the way forwards in the past. Mud was a bad thing. And how could we just all work better to try and think about how we can knit together curriculum and school sites and community all together? So geography can't do everything, but it can be a subject to bring people together alongside the action and the evidence. So that's my Hey, Peneth. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Anthony. That's really thoughtful again. It's interesting that case study you bring in there around the idea that maybe we're shifting towards adaptation, and maybe a question we can explore at the moment is maybe the type of geography we're teaching maybe changing. Are we shifting to more around stories of adaptation, and kind of how has climate change affected and influenced the type of geography that we're exploring now? And the other bit that stood out for me was the talk of the senior leadership as well, and the idea that how the fundamental role that they play within the local governance and systems. I mean, and sorry, the only other bit I really wanted to emphasize as well was you've had that personal story around eco schools and the role that that played, and I think this also may be an important part of the jigsaw is that as much as David has said, we can't stereotype geography teachers, and not every geography teacher is enthusiastic around this. I think for some, this is often the thing that brings them community and connects them with other people, and potentially keeps them within the profession and kind of is an important part of their well-being. So finally, I would like to introduce Caroline, and Caroline Room, you're head of geography at Puttridge High School in Luton.
That's right.
You've been part of the Ministry of Eco Education community for quite a few years, and you're also a really enthusiastic participant of the Younger in Britain Challenge, and kind of vocal champion for that. And then also the thing that I'm hoping we can talk about a bit more about later as well is you're part of Zero Carbon Luton and a lot of the wider community activities that have been happening across Luton. So, Caroline.
Okay, so as you've mentioned, I'm a geography teacher. I've been teaching for 18 years now. I've been a head of department for 10 years, and I've been a sustainability lead for 6 years. When I first arrived in Puttridge, sustainability was not a thing. There was no eco education, there was no eco schools, which kind of blew my mind slightly because I came from a school where we did a lot of work on environmental education, on sustainability. So, but there was a gap in the market, and so I created the role of sustainability lead, which I did for 5.5 years with no pay, voluntary. A lot of geography teachers and others do this role in that way. And my school finally agreed this year that they would give me a TLR for all of this hard work. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm talking very much from my experiences in secondary education. So obviously quite a different perspective to, in particular, Anthony, coming from the more primary side of things. In terms of the question we're trying to answer today, are geography teachers the key to whole school sustainability? In my experience, I would say yes. On the whole, I would say it's because we are uniquely placed in terms of our knowledge background, our understanding of these issues. We are a multidisciplinary subject. We have been taught about climate change throughout our own education, our own careers. We've thought about it deeply, and we are not only taught about climate change, but all of what we learn about in geography is all about linking different parts of our world together, different ideas, thinking synoptically, thinking across the sciences and the social sciences in order to connect all of these ideas. And really, if we want to be sustainable in our schools, that's what we need to do. We need to be able to connect all of these different ideas. We need that systems thinking. So what I've found in my experience is I can bring that geographical lens about the issues, and I've been using them to educate the people in power. Because as I said, when I arrived at Puttridge, the people in power had not considered sustainability at all. They didn't see it as an important aspect of things. There was no work on eco-education at all. And even within the geography department, when I arrived here, there was actually a very light touch in terms of climate change, which I also found quite surprising. So I think geographers are actually the key to educating the people in power about the issues and really being able to bring those people on board in order for sustainability to become a successful thing within schools. I think, we do have an important role at this time when the DfE has, sort of said every school has to have a sustainability lead. That's not currently happening. I think the latest figures are only about a third of schools have somebody in place. So there's quite a lot of schools who haven't taken that advice and haven't managed to find anyone who's interested, perhaps, or don't know how to get someone interested in the role. So it may need some cross-school work as well, which is something that I'm doing within the Chiltern Learning Trust. Puttridge is part of a larger trust. And even less schools have a climate action plan in place as well, which is something that can be quite simple to write if you know how to do it. But if you've never done any work on this before, then it can be really, really difficult. And again, that's where I think that those analytical skills that geographers naturally have can be really brought to the fore. So, I think to just give a simple answer to the question, I think geography teachers are the key to whole school sustainability, because I think we are the key to starting the process to moving more schools forward towards sustainable practice.
Well, thank you, Caroline. I was just thinking, imagine if we had Steve Brace on the call, I'm sure he'd be hammering that point of it. Knowledge, concept, skills, those are the things very special, specialist knowledge of geographers, specialist language, all of those things, which around that systems approach is maybe the piece that geography kind of, if it was a key, if it was a piece of a jigsaw, that would be the bit that it was holding. So maybe just starting on some of these questions, the wider questions, you were talking there about educating people in power. Do you see that as something that the students are involved with? Is that through the geographical curriculum that students are involved in creating or engaging with people in power? How does that work?
I think it's my experience has been it's had to be a two-pronged approach. So For example, as I mentioned before this call to you, this morning I was presenting whole school on climate anxiety as a safeguarding issue. And that's something that I've had to lead on. I've done quite a lot of reading and research around that matter. I've then gone to the safeguarding lead, who initially was totally confused about what even climate anxiety was as a concept. And so I've had to lead initially on that. But quite a lot of the work that we've done from the start here at Puttridge has been youth-led. So even before the Young Green Britain programme, we had an eco group which grew quite quickly actually, and the whole focus was on upskilling our young people to be able to identify the issues. So we took a geographical approach there. So we trained them to collect evidence using fieldwork. So again, that geographical approach, to then present that evidence to the people in power and ask, what are you going to do about it? And then when perhaps they didn't get the answers they wanted, we then did more work with them to facilitate them being able to design their own solutions and go back to the people in power with, well, you didn't come up with a solution, so here's our solution, and we'd like this to happen next, and can we have some money, and all those kinds of things. And since over the last 6 years, we've had multiple really successful projects take place, both that are student-led but also staff-led as well. So I can give some examples if that would be useful.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, give us maybe just one. Is there one that really stands out? Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you two. One is a student-led and one is staff-led. So in terms of staff-led, I think the biggest change that has taken place is with the school building. So the work, as I said, the work that I've done with SLT, with the site team, to bring sustainability into the centre of decision making. We got solar panels onto our school roof, so electricity is now renewable more than it's not, which is fantastic. And we also have recycling as well across schools, so that's been really big. In terms of the students, they designed I think one of the biggest projects, which is now in place. Yay! It's taken a few years, but they designed an outdoor classroom and learning space, including a greenhouse and a garden. So this year we'll have herbs and vegetables that will go into the food department, but we have multiple groups who are working within that space in various different ways, which is absolutely amazing. And the children have designed that from scratch and worked with the site team, the finance team, and all sorts of other people as well. Lots of teachers from different departments are now involved, because all those secret gardeners have come out of the woodwork and actually want to get involved, which is fantastic. So that came from geography. But I think linking back to what Anthony and David have said, it's, in my opinion, geographers who are leading the way, but then to pull everybody else in so that it is sustainable long term.
Was there a teacher example as well? Sorry, were you going to?
So the teacher example is the solar panels.
Oh, sorry, I missed that one. Yes. Okay. So maybe this is a good moment also then just to say, if anyone's got any wider questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat or raise your hand. And I'm also just going to draw back in David and Anthony into I'm going to bring you on. Sorry, I'll add spotlight. Now, one of the things that came to mind there that I know, Anthony, you've got a real interest in as well, and it's obviously a very specialist aspect of geography, is that sense of fieldwork and the role that fieldwork plays. And what about then? Yeah, how can fieldwork be part of this? We take students to coasts, to rivers. We take students to places like Iceland, which are some of the places most severely affected by climate change. How could the fieldwork be part of this?
I think for the youngest children, it is teaching them the name of things. So it's that idea that Robert Macfarlane has come up with in The Lost Words, the fact that we have had those words taken out of our dictionaries for everyday trees and bushes and landscapes, and we need to make sure that they are there. And that's definitely where the geography and the science curriculum can come in, because if we haven't got the names for things, if we haven't got the vocabulary for things, we are not necessarily going to value them and the diversity that they bring. So even the other day, I was thinking that I was with some engaged geographers who were adults, who were working in museums and were working in initial teacher education, and they were being very open about the fact that they didn't know the names of all the trees. No, neither did I, but collaboratively, eventually we came to know and name the trees. And it's through that conversation and that discussion in a place that you start to notice patterns and notice different shades of green and notice heights and the bizarre shapes that trees have. And that's just the starting point to that appreciation. And of course, then the next step is, with the conversations that we're having, is the fact that some of those trees are really under threat. Ash dieback, oak processionary moth, you can start to get into those sorts of threats that these everyday landscapes, these marginal woodlands, these secondary woodlands, or maybe if you're lucky enough, some fragments of primary woodland as well, that actually may not survive unless we think about what will happen next, unless we perhaps plant different things, or unless we, and that's adaptation, but or unless we make some other big pivots as a world and as a society, because we're not going to have this green and pleasant land, for want of a better phrase, unless we really think about how those everyday spaces, those near to spaces, are named, understood, and have a sense of beauty given to them from the work that we do, definitely across the curriculum. I mean, I just love going outside writing poetry with young children, where we start to not just name individual trees, we start to form stories about those trees and emotional bonds with those trees. Which is your favorite tree? Which is the most interesting shape? Can you put your body in a similar shape to that tree? So it's those sorts of everyday interactions. Can you lie on the ground and just look at the sky and just see the shape that the trees are making in the sky? Just really get embedded as a human being within that space. And it sounds very touchy-feely and wishy-washy and perhaps very primary. And okay, Anthony, pat you on the head. But it is that emotional response to place, which is that starting point, which us as adults will know when a favorite space of ours is tarmacked over, or a favorite tree of ours, suddenly the chainsaw has been cut through it. It's happened on my street. And you start to think, why? Hopefully a new tree will be put in place. And it's that provocation, really, that actually taking children outside can sometimes be, where we start to ask them about likes and dislikes and emotional responses. So the affective domain is what we in geography education often talk about in terms of that. We're trying to tap into that affective domain alongside the cognitive domain, obviously, as well.
Yeah. So what you've illustrated there really well is the potential for a really excellent, particularly primary geography curriculum, to move beyond quite narrow perceptions of what geography is, and instead, so this idea, and again, it links to this idea of sustainability often being very narrowly defined as climate education. It's instead saying, look, how can we take young people and open up their kind of understanding of the world in a way that they critically reflect on their relationship and with the rest of nature. And yeah, that's I mean, you've described it so well there. Yeah, and Georgina there has sort of said actually there's potential there for far more of this in secondary as well. And I do know that we've done a lot of work with English teachers who really enjoy taking young people outside as a way to immerse them in the environment and to yeah, kind of allow opportunity for creativity. I don't know, does anyone else? Yeah, Caroline, do you want to come in on that?
I was just going to say, I don't think it's just a primary thing. I think secondary can embrace this way of learning as well. Since we had the outdoor classroom developed at school, I gave the challenge to every subject leader to design at least one opportunity for their department to take the children outside and engage in the space in some way. And the majority of departments have really risen to the challenge. So, you know, we have our IT department, for example, who've designed fieldwork in IT where they go and they do litter counts around the school site, and they then bring that back and they make graphs and things. And our maths department come out and they do maths outside. We've got science who are doing biodiversity studies, and English, like you said, come out and they write poetry, or they come out and they just read in the open air and they talk to their students about why actually it's a lovely space to just be sat reading and engaging in nature and being outside. So I think it's not just primary, but sometimes it takes secondary school teachers a little bit of a push in order to think, oh, actually we can go outside and do those things. So yeah.
Can I say, Caroline, you're referencing there maybe the role that you've played to model some of this behaviour and then help build the confidence of other subject teachers. And I wonder, is there a potential there as well as geography teachers to sort of lead, in inverted commas, in a way to model some of this behaviour and then ultimately maybe be involved in staff training? I don't know. I know, Caroline, I do know that you've been involved in some staff training. I wondered if you want to talk about that. And I know obviously that's David's sort of bread and butter is the training. But Caroline, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I definitely think so. We as geographers, we do naturally, we feel okay going outside and teaching a lesson, because obviously we do that for every time we do field work. And there are other subjects like PE, for example, very comfortable teaching in what might be seen as a more informal space. But I have had teachers come to me and say, I would love to take my class outside, but I've got absolutely no idea how I would do that. I find that quite scary. They're not going to be sat at desks. They're not trapped in. Like, are they all going to run wild? So I definitely think it's something that geographers, but perhaps other teachers as well, can bring their expertise to. One of the things we did at Puttridge was we filmed geography lessons outside and also PE lessons outside, and we shared those videos with our staff so that they could see the types of teaching behaviours that we were demonstrating and the types of language we were using with the children to make sure that the high expectations were still in place. And I think that did give other staff a lot more confidence that actually they could take the children outside and there wouldn't be absolute chaos.
David, sorry, what about your role then with some of this teacher training? Is there the potential that geography can lead maybe from more of a subject knowledge area, if we said more teachers across the school need to know some of this around the climate and nature crisis?
I think so, but I think I would perhaps just gently challenge Caroline a little bit on two levels. First, I'm not sure you necessarily realise how good you are or how good your school is by comparison to the majority. If you look at Barings and you look at the report from Ofsted in 2023, less than a third of schools are doing fieldwork in a meaningful way. Very few are doing a fieldwork progression. Almost none have got curricular thinking or confidence of skills. So when you say, as geographers, we naturally feel okay about going out and doing fieldwork, I don't think that's true of geography across the whole sector. And increasingly, it's not true in certain parts of the sector, the disadvantaged communities that we serve at Teach First. Field work is a rarity. It's not something that teachers have confidence with. So I think the question becomes, how do we capture, and Anthony talked about this earlier, the pockets of best practice and the bright green beacons that we have in spaces? How do we share that better? How do we teach teachers to do outdoor learning? How does that form part of a teacher training curriculum? How do you model it? How do you learn it? How do you do it in the same way that you would do classroom teaching? How do you teach teachers to do fieldwork? Becky Kitchen's fieldwork report, High Quality Geography Fieldwork for All, gives some quite conceptual overviews, but it leaves a really big gap in the sense of, as an ITE provider, what am I doing to support teachers to do fieldwork, and could I do it better? And I think the answer is, there are big gaps. I don't have the opportunity to teach as well as I want in that space. We focus on the classroom because that's what Ofsted inspects. We focus on the powerful knowledge in the curriculum because that's what the sector expects and demands. And sometimes the cultural capital or the whole school or the whole child experience becomes a nice to have rather than a need to. So I think we need to shift that. Anthony said in the chat, it's about permissions and teachers feeling like they have permission to go outside and do that sort of thing. How do we give them the confidence to do that more? How do we equip them to say a lesson outside is just as important as a lesson in the classroom? Going out and doing the sensory work that Anthony talked about is just as important as the do now and the starter and the retrieval and the activity that we would instinctively recognize as a great lesson. If an inspector or a senior member of your leadership team was observing you for a lesson, would you feel confident going out and doing that forest school lesson, or would you play it safe and stay in the classroom? And until we get to a point where that is the quote unquote ecosystem of the school, where that's part of our culture and who we are as teachers and the confidence we have, I think there's still work to be done. Caroline, it sounds like you work in a brilliant place and that you have led that superbly over a decade and you've built that culture. I think that is the exception, not the norm. I think that's incredibly rare across schools.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing that sort of sense of reality, because I know that we often can convene a panel of really enthusiastic and kind of the people, with the best practice and sort of that sense that it's not everyone. What about though this other piece around subject knowledge and the idea that geographers, maybe because of their degrees or because of the curricula that they're teaching, have better knowledge than other people compared, within the school environment? And I mean, a good example
if they have degrees. And that's the landscape challenge we're facing in ITE at the moment. Increasingly, there are non-specialist teaching in the curriculum. There's a recent report by the Teacher Education Phase Committee that suggests up to 30% of lessons at Key Stage 3 are being taught by non-specialist geographers, people whose QTS isn't in geography. And let's bear in mind that to achieve a QTS in secondary geography, your degree has to be 50% geography related content. So you don't have to have done a pure geography degree. You could have done environmental science. You could have done international relations and politics. So to get onto the course to do secondary QTS geography, you don't have to have done a geography degree. You have to have had it at A level as a minimum. So those assumptions can potentially lead us down a track that we end up generating unrealistic standards. Oh, you'll have done this as part of your degree. Actually, you might not. Okay, so let's work back then. How do we get everyone comfortable with the idea of inquiry and fieldwork and our disciplinary heritage? How do we do that? How do we build that subject and disciplinary knowledge? Because actually people might not have done a dissertation, or they might not have done it as part of their degree increasingly. And Anthony, presumably you see the same.
Yeah, absolutely, because we are starting in some cases from scratch. We are starting with 18-year-olds who've dropped it in year 9. And if they've never been taught by anybody who has a geographical background, they've just gone through the motions. So they've never been examined in it at all through their school career. That doesn't mean they don't have insights. It doesn't mean they haven't got things we can tap into. And that's what hopefully a good initial teacher education phase can draw out of them. The fact that they can walk out of that seminar room and just see the world differently, just see the walk to the bus stop, the walk to the tram, the walk to the train, and just start to notice those patterns, those processes in their daily lives, and then start to be able to critically engage with YouTube videos of distant places and photographs that we want them to deconstruct and notice those same patterns or similar patterns and processes that might be in very contrasting locations. So it isn't hard to get them there, but it is hard in a initial teacher education number of hours that we get to teach them the breadth of the curriculum, because there's so many things that we could do. And I would encourage any viewers, if they want to know more about early years and primary geography, obviously the GA is a good place to go, but we've also got some free webinars called Geog Live that are on YouTube as well that can help give more insight and inspiration into those different areas, because there is a lot of subject knowledge there. There's a lot of perspectives there that, as David said, through Becky Kitchen's fieldwork report, and there's another document from the GA called the Framework for School Geography, which again is quite a dense, hard to work through document if you're a non-specialist, but that gives you the basic substantive and then conceptual perspectives on what makes the subject, because that's the problem with our subject sometimes. People still just don't get what it is. Very easy to say, oh, it's people, place, it's environment, it's interactions, it's cultural diversity, it's all these sorts of things. But actually, what's just beneath that? How do we engage with that, and then engage with the fact that it is then all those things in relation to the real world? This is a real world subject that is constantly evolving and changing. So there is incumbent on you this importance to keep up to date. There's such a lot going on that's often buried third or fourth down the news cycle. It's never top of the agenda, given all the wars and other stuff that's going on and big personalities in the world. But there's such a lot going on in terms of this subject and these areas that we really do need to keep abreast of, because it could be perceived to be quite a worrying time in terms of the various things that are going on. But it's up to us to interpret that and not to scare people too much, but teach with a sense of honesty and reality.
And I think one of the things that's really interesting in that space is we've got a lot of people who are doing brilliant geography in that space who wouldn't call themselves geographers. We've got, people working in nature education and leading on components. My wife works in renewable energy. She's a lawyer. She wouldn't call herself geography, but if I look at what she does day in, day out, I would call her a geographer. And so we've got that trick of, is this our discipline or not? Are we gatekeeping or not? Are we allowing people to come in because their climate education is really powerful and really important? Or are we putting a wall around it and saying, oh no, only geography should, and our discipline is? And how do we fight that as a sort of, I don't want to over dramatize, but the existential battle of the fact that we're an option subject. And if we don't stake our claim, then our students won't pick GCSE geography because they'll think, oh, I don't need to do geography to do this stuff because I can do it as a lawyer, or I can do it as a town planner, and I can do something else. We have this tension that we are an options subject. It's going to get worse, by the way, if they introduce a natural history GCSE, and then will they do geography or natural history? How does that split? That tension of, what do we want in terms of great education? What do we want in terms of great outcomes for the child versus a scarcity mindset of, I need to have my GCSE classes, I need my A-level students, I need my people doing geography degrees, because otherwise who's going to be the geography teacher of the future? That's a tension that is difficult to reconcile sometimes.
David, I felt like we were on the edge of a rabbit hole there, that you were about to take us down of what is geography? What really are we? Which I know is this tension that we're still always playing out. But the other piece maybe that comes to mind with that is that sense of how public attitudes towards climate, particularly maybe things around net zero, how that then manifests also in the classroom. Because, I know plenty of anecdotes from teachers we meet who also, the response from young people now has become quite extreme. And so as soon as you start talking about climate change in the classroom, the how you teach that has shifted and changed, or has needed to. But maybe that public perception, and maybe it does talking too much about that within geography, it makes people want to study geography less. I don't know if anyone's got any attitude or kind of experience of that.
I think we're seeing it like everything in wider society, I'm sad to say. I think it just becomes a polemic or a polarizer. The people for whom it is important will go to it harder than they would have done before, and the people for whom it's I'm not sure about that, will go away from it harder than they would have done before. And I think it becomes, we are seeing geography numbers go up at GCSE. And a large part of that is young people wanting to feel better informed and more understanding of the climate crisis that they face. We see geography numbers falling or stabilised at A level as that tension of, well, what do I want to go off and study, and where do I want to go, and the STEM drive, and falling even further at undergraduate level. And I think it becomes that space of, it can work really powerfully for some, it can turn others off. Where do you pitch the balance in your own school, in your own context? I guess Caroline's story would be really interesting in terms of, with all of this incredible work, what have your GCSE and A-level options numbers looked like over the last decade that you've been doing this?
Yeah, so when I first arrived, we had 38 children in year 11 taking GCSE geography of a cohort of 240. So it wasn't great. I've just had the numbers for next year's GCSE. We have 161. So it's definitely had a really positive impact on our numbers. We don't have A-level here at Puttridge, but we do send a lot of students on to do A-level geography at other in other schools and colleges. So it has definitely, by engaging them in sustainability, not just in our geography curriculum, but also through other subjects and through the extracurricular, it's definitely had a really positive impact on our numbers. And we actually tell students to take geography and history, because I don't really agree with that whole like conflict there. So I say to them, you've got to take both if you really want to understand the world we live in. So yeah.
So just maybe to sort of finish on, there's one topic which people have referenced and we've sort of skirted round, but one thing I wanted to just finish on then, what potential does geography, the geography curriculum and geography teachers have in sharing that sense of optimism, of action and hope? And maybe this is also an opportunity to share a tip or a piece of advice for a geography teacher to say, well, think about this, or could you do this when you're exploring the theme of climate change? Is there anyone who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think we've seen students in geography really appreciate us creating a space to discuss climate change and wider environmental issues. So we have climate change as a topic itself in our Year 9 curriculum, but we actually teach climate change throughout our curriculum. So, for example, our Year 8s are doing a topic on the geography of health at the moment, and climate change forms about a third of that topic. And a lot of students, they really, really appreciate the opportunity to discuss their feelings around this, but also to discuss what they think should happen next. And we often will say to them, okay, that's a great idea. How are we going to make that happen? So all of our extracurriculars within the geography department are eco-based, so eco schools, Young Green Britain, and we have also some work that we're doing with LSE as well. So we bring in academics to work with some of our high retainers as well. So we don't do any other extracurriculars apart from around this issue. And I think it's really built a bit of a movement, to be honest, because we do have children who've gone on post 16 and are working in the wider Luton community with a variety of different organisations, not just their colleges and schools, but also with Luton Borough Council. We've had children organising climate conferences across the town, working with other young people from other backgrounds as well. So I hope that what we're doing is not just about providing them with a great education, but also providing them with the skills to make positive change in the future, possibly not just around like climate change and sustainability, but just giving them those skills to make positive change in whatever way that they want to as well.
I'll jump on that and share a resource, because I think there's a couple of things that have changed in the last 5 or so years. When I was a teacher in classrooms, a lot of the time I'd be talking about solutions in kind of a wishy-washy, mythical, well, we could do this and we could do that and we could, yeah. And I think it was very difficult for students to engage with that. If you have not come across it, and I would strongly recommend doing this, and there's a load of ways to do it, and I've shared an article in the chat which you can have a look at. The En-ROADS Climate Simulator is, I think, one of the best teaching tools, not just to understand the dimensions of what's going on, but also to generate a real sense of exactly how we solve some of these problems based on data, not fantasy. So it's a climate model aggregate simulator. Basically, you can access it on a desktop. It's free. It brings together the best of climate data and research and shows you exactly what happens if we do this, or exactly what happens if we change that. And if you've got A-level students or really brilliant students, En-ROADS run conferences for like C-suite executives in America, and they do 3 days and they drill down into every single detail of it. And you can do that if you've got the students. But it's a fantastic way to move from this is a really horrible situation. This is a crisis. Here are 17 real world solutions that are viable. Let's see if we can make them happen. Now let's talk about what the problem really is, because it isn't that the solutions don't exist, it's that the political will or the leadership or the implementation doesn't exist. And we move students very quickly into a space when we run these conferences of, okay, so actually what you're saying to me is I need to be more informed to decide who my leaders are. I need to be more active in terms of how I engage with these solutions. I need to, and it moves the dial of responsibility. It becomes less a conversation about, oh, this is terrible, we can't solve it, into, well, hang on. In 10 minutes, we as a group came up with 5 solutions and we have solved it. What's wrong with the world leadership? What's going on here? How do we challenge this? How do we play that conversation? And it's a fabulous resource. If anyone wants to pick up and have conversations, I'm always happy to come and run conferences and do bits and pieces. But it's all free, and their training resources are brilliant. Their materials are brilliant. You can do an online course that connects you with tons of their teachers and facilitators across the world, and it's a brilliant tool to move from not just hopeful but solutions focused teaching in a way that's really grounded in what is possible and practical. We don't need Elon Musk to whisk us to the moon with a magic solution and $1 trillion investment from the US government. We just need to do this, and we need to have the political will to pull that lever. And I think that practical is what I think we need to get students much more comfortable with. This is solvable. This is doable. Without, good luck. You're the generation that will fix it. We wash our hands of you. Go and solve the future, kids. Like balancing that. But yeah, it's an interesting. But En-ROADS is my tip that you asked for. Sorry, that was 27,000
great,
words
David.
when 4 would have done.
Sorry, Anthony, did you want to come in? Yeah.
I think my final tip is just take a breath if you're the subject lead and be brave and lead a staff meeting that's not in the staff room space. So walk around your school site, take them for a walk. It feels really odd this when I've ever done this, but walk with your school staff around the local streets straight after school, and have interactions with the trees, with the potholes, with the local parkland, and just talk about those spaces, because you'll be really perhaps not surprised, but I was really surprised, because these teachers drive to work, because these teachers take public transport to work and are harried, and because it's dark and it's wet, they genuinely haven't seen those spaces. You can make a big presumption that they'll know about the street that your school's on. They'll know the little bit of fragment of woodland that you got just around the back of the school, but most of them will not have done, and they will not have been there with their peers as teachers. So teachers are really good at creative solutions, really good at thinking in a space about what the opportunities are. And you'll definitely get teachers who will build lessons out of that. But you have to be brave and say, we want an hour of the inset time that we've got this term. We're going to do it about geography, and we're going to do it about how this place is changing for the better and for the worse. And we're trying to think about how this links in with the climate emergency that we've got. And actually, because of that embedded subject knowledge from the news, from that sense of goodwill that I think people still do have in education towards this subject, they've perhaps not been sullied by the news media just yet in terms of these perspectives that we're trying to engage people on, you will find that lessons flow from that. And as Georgina very helpfully said in the chat, there's connections then that can be made to different subjects, and just maybe then saying, well, we've done this as a staff, shall we this term in the summer term, let's do all one lesson outside, whatever the subject is, then do that in the autumn, do that in the spring. Even if that's just 3 more lessons outside, that could be starting to push these agendas. That's a small, iterative, incremental change that maybe will then make a difference.
Sorry.
I just thought of one last thing that I wanted to give as a piece of advice, and that is to promote everything from the tiniest little action to the largest action, because one of the things that we found is initially it was really difficult to get action going because children and staff just didn't believe that it would stick, and that it was even possible. So the more that you achieve, the more that people will believe they can achieve. So I would say promote internally, externally, bang on about it constantly, and the more you do that, the more people will actually want to be involved as well.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think as much as, we started with a cautionary tale and there was a bit of sort of actually, let's couch this in a sort of, sense of caution. I think what we've actually heard through this call is some of the very best of what geography offers this subject and this space, both, across the phases at primary and secondary. And so I did want to say thank you so much to the panelists for sharing your experience and thank you so much for your input. Thank you also to the audience members and for all the people who will watch this in the future. Next week, we're exploring the question, can schools be hubs for imagining the future? Inspired by Rob Hopkins and lots of people working in the space of imagination. So thank you again, everyone. And we will see you later. Bye.